You're listening to Funk with Fate, a show about being a body and cultivating pleasurable relationships with everything. And I'm your host, Mackenzie McCormick. This podcast will explore how our embodied experiences connect us to the world through astrology, philosophy, dance, magic, and anything that invigorates our aliveness. What makes us feel the most alive? Big inhale, big exhale. Now let's get grooving. Hello, Hottie, and welcome to the show. Right now, it is 10:04 a.m. Eastern on Wednesday, May 17th, 2023. And at this moment, Cancer is rising. And today we are back with Mars, with this series that I am calling the Spicy Rendezvous, because it is spicy just as Mars is, and that is what we love about them. And today we are looking at Mars in Leo, and I'm so excited to introduce to y'all. We have Pallas on the show today.
Hi, happy to
And
be here.
I'm
Mars is basically exactly on the ascendant where I am right now.
Perfect. And yeah, Mars will rise in my location while we're talking, which is perfect. So Pallas, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, introduce yourself to the people on the pod, where you come from with your practice, with your roots, anything that you wish to share about yourself and what you do.
I'm Pallas K. Augustine. I'm a writer, an astrologer, an artist, and consultant, and magician. My partner and I run Idola Stellarum, which is sort of a ritual temple space where we primarily create astrological talismans and offer them to the world now, where our second collection is coming. Yeah. But we also we run events and just talk to people about living in spirited life. And it's pretty amazing. I also, I've been an astrologer for a million years. Someone first read my chart when I was 12, and I started offering public consultations in like early 2016. And since then I've primarily worked with clients one-on-one, both in person. My practice was founded in person, although I've also done virtual consultations since then too. And then slowly it's grown to primarily online, and which is amazing. It means I get to talk to people from all over the world. And as you will hear from my chart, that is like a very good thing for my soul. So what else? I'm originally from so-called Canada, Treaty 1 territory in Manitoba, flatlands and massive skies. I'm currently on Mohican land in Western Massachusetts, kind of nestled in between the Taconics and the Berkshires, living that like Northern Appalachian green life. I have a dog named Vesper. She's a recent addition to our life. And
We love her.
I'll talk more about
we
her later.
Love her.
Oh, she's so good. She's right here. She's being so good right now. If she has a sunbeam to lie in, she's just like so happy, which like honestly relatable. What else? I've been on a hiatus from work. So this is sort of one of my first appearances back to work. I immigrated from Canada to the US.
And Pallas has also been writing a book.
Oh yeah, the book too. So the book happened. So a year ago, we did a Kickstarter crowdfunding, my book on the IC, which started in like early 2018. And so that is coming to fruition finally. So we're in editing mode, and I mean, some of it's like edited already and like just being proofread, and then some of it's still in its, like the method chapter, when it got into revisions, became 3 method chapters. So it's good. And there's like a manifesto chapter, which I'm being like very careful with, because I think it's actually like a pretty important document as far as what I do and we do goes. So I'm taking our time, and excited for the 500 amazing backers to finally get their copies sooner than later.
I'm so excited to get my book, y'all. Y'all don't understand. Y'all
You
do
were
not
such a
understand.
huge supporter of it from
I'm
like so early on.
I'm so excited about this book, y'all. Also because Pallas and I just have great synastry. And so whenever the IC book like was even launched, I was like, yes, this is resonating wholly and
Mhm.
deeply.
Oh,
Um,
yes.
oh yes. So let's go ahead and dive in. So since we're kind of talking about chart placements and stuff, Pallas has Mars in Leo, of course. Do you want to share like with us what you're comfortable sharing about your chart?
Sure. I am. Yes, let's build it from Mars. So I have Mars and Leo in the ninth. So I'm a Sag rising.
We love Sag
And
risings on the pod. Anybody who knows anybody about me knows we love Sag risings on the
well,
pod.
Sag risings also just seem to know and love other Sag risings.
It's
Like
universally
no one
known.
else can stand us.
Truly, like, and it was actually very funny at Norwalk last year. There was like a group, there were like 3 or 4 Sag risings talking and like 1 Scorpio rising, and they were like, y'all are a lot right now. Y'all are a lot right now. Love y'all, but y'all are a lot right
Especially with
now.
fire placements. Like, yeah. So Sag rising, but my Jupiter's in Aquarius in the third. So there is a sort of Saturnian, airy, weird detachment quality, despite all my fire. And then my midheaven is in Virgo, ruled by Mercury, also in Leo, and they're pretty close. My lot of spirit is also in Leo. And so they're all ruled by a sun in Virgo. First decan, it's some of the only actual dignity in my chart. So I have this like first decan Virgo sun, which is like a very good decan, if I do say so myself. Yeah, and so
Honestly,
it's
all of the decans of Virgo are really nice.
yeah.
But
Yeah. So it's pretty close to Regulus. So, and it's also in a pair into Regulus. So we got lots
we
of
got that Regulus sun.
Leo lion going on. Yeah, and then my other placements will come out as we talk, but
Yeah.
those are kind of the most relevant ones, I think, in terms of my Mars.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was so excited to have Pallas on, specifically having Mars and Leo, but also having Mars and Leo in the ninth house. Even though it is not the sun exalt or rejoices in the ninth house, excuse me, it's Mars ruled by the sun. And there's a relationship that Mars and the sun have together that I view as so special. Even though Mars is a nocturnal planet, the Mars solar relationship is so special. And I was so excited about this episode and this placement as a whole. So yeah, really excited you're here and to talk about this.
Yeah, it is. It is powerful. And I feel like having this conversation with Mars I mean, I love Mars and Cancer in a human. It's like one of my favorite Marses, but Mars in the sky when it's transiting, I always forget how bad I feel.
It's sensitive. Yeah.
I
So
always forget.
so y'all, right now Mars is at the 28 degrees of Cancer. So we are recording this right as Mars is about to ingress into Leo and as Pallas is about to start their Mars return. But it's the final degrees and they're definitely hitting hard because Mars in Cancer has felt and always feels pretty soft.
Yeah, yeah. I'm tired. But Mars and Cancer, to be clear, I love in a human. It's like I have so many people dear to me with Mars and Cancer. And it's just like it is such a different beast than Mars and Leo for sure. Yeah, that I mean, of course, and all Leo placements depend on the condition of the sun. And my sun is pretty blessed. Like it's in the 10th.
Your sun is blessed.
Yeah, it's in the 10th whole sign, but it is like it's on the opposite side of the sun from the angle. So it actually is like pretty cadent dynamically. And that I definitely feel that. It's like I feel like other people really see the like 10th houseness of the sun. But when it comes to like any like control or say I have over it, it's like very not. It's like,
Not
it
there.
is it's one of those well, and this is Virgo suns generally, I feel are a bit like this, but that kind of like resistant to the calling, so I feel like a lot of my Mars and Leo and the Mars Sun day night relationship too is about like managing that, right? And there is this relationship to Eros and this like surrendering to the call and all that shit.
Mm.
So I feel like that's all part of that Mars Sun relationship.
Very much so. Yeah, especially in Leo. I guess before we go any further, I want to go ahead and put it out there that we are talking about Mars. Want to put a trigger warning here that we might talk about things that are sensitive, potentially very triggering. Mars is considered a malefic planet and involves things or can involve things such as aggression and inflammation, injury, anger, potentially illness, things like that. And just to be aware of that as we talk about things that can come up, and to be aware of yourself and your body as we discuss these things if you're not in a place that you want to hear that and handle that right now. So take care of yourself and your body first and foremost, always, before we can move forward.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So let's dive in. Mars in Leo is ruled by the sun. And so, like you said, it's very dependent on the condition of the sun, but by and large, the sun likes it big and bold and beautiful. And I love Mars in Leo because it really feels to have an almost unapologetic approach to doing things. And I have such respect for that I love to watch a Mars in Leo like really do the thing, because they do the thing in a way that no one else can do the thing.
Yeah, there's definitely a relationship with authenticity, and that it has that kind of like malefic Mars undeniable quality, right? And it just so, I mean, Mars in Leo is one of those placements that I feel like is more fun to watch than it is to embody.
That's very true.
This
Wow.
is it's valid. It's valid.
Because it is beautiful to watch.
Yeah, and there is there's like an interesting power to it for sure. That's not like a traditional Mars, like dignified Mars power, right? It's more like a there's a force that is about bigness rather than it is about like incisiveness or sharpness. Yeah, thinking about like I was so, when I was a kid in one of my principal's office, he had like, this is such a weird thing to have in an office. We had like a blowfish that was like blown up. It was like a taxidermy blowfish. It's like Prairie, Canada. I don't know, very strange. But it was like so pointy, right? But it was actually, you could tell it was this like very soft kind of fish, and the only it was like fake that it was so big. It was like blown up and its spikes would get all like aggressive, right? But it was just like a scare tactic. It was actually still like a very vulnerable creature. It just had this like bigness. It would put on this kind of like bigness quality. And so I feel like that's kind of a bit of Mars in Leo, like how aggressively shiny. Yeah.
That's a really good descriptor. Aggressively shiny. Because very larger than life, to the point of almost putting on a show. And I know that that's very much a Leo trope. Like people really love to put that on Leo. Like, oh my God, you love the drama. You love to put on a show. But like, so if the shoe fits, the shoe fits.
Well, and with Mars, it's also a defense mechanism too, right?
Absolutely.
It's a way of protecting ourselves. Yeah, and it just so happens to be quite like people like it.
People
like, not
love
always,
it,
course, but people like it, and
it.
so it's a way to. It's one of the more relatable Marses, I guess I would say too. There's something, and this is also Leo placements. This is something about people can generate, like Leo placements gets projected on like a lot, and so there is this way of that it's like literally relatable. People like recognize, and so a Mars in Leo, there is something almost like aspirational about it. And there's like, I feel like it's the things I get complimented on are often things that seem related to my Mars, like more than my Sun, more than my Sag placements. Like it's usually, I'm like, oh, that's my like Mars Mercury, right? And of course Mercury rules my midheaven, so it makes sense that people are seeing that. But it's like that Mars quality coming into it, like when it's like about like bravery or audacity or confidence, and I'm like, these are really kind of sensitive things for me. Like they're not, they're hard won, as most Mars gifts are. And for them to be so visible, right? And have this like undeniable quality. Like as you mentioned, like Mars is a night sect planet. There is, like Mars in Cancer with triplicity. Like I always think about that. Like I think about these like Mars functioning at these hidden depths, right? And how like
Mm.
that being a preferable kind of mode of being. And then it's like Mars and Leo.
Balls ablazing.
Yeah. It was like putting, just like having all your kind of like vulnerabilities on the stage and that being the thing that you're like lauded about.
Yeah, absolutely. And that being the thing that people so highly commend you for, and being able to simultaneously protect yourself while also revealing parts of yourself as well. It's a very dual approach that is taken when you're like, here are these things about me that are so vulnerable and so soft and so intimate, but yet I'm able to show them in a way that is so specifically tailored to be presented in a way that you now are like, oh my God, look at you and what you have done, when literally it's like the softest, ooey gooeyest parts of yourself.
It's like, oh, I had to to survive. Okay.
To survive. Yeah, it was a survival mechanism. And that is something that Mars truly does better than any other planet, which is know how to survive in any given environment that they're given.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, there's something there too about like day sect, night sect. I mean, having Mars as like my malefic out of sect, like there's definitely a lot of my life that can be put to my fucking Mars that is like not pleasurable, right? That are very Mars specific experiences. And but of course also those are like, my experiences of trauma, disability, homelessness, like all these things. You find them and inevitably they end up coming back to my Mars. And I mean also Saturn, but that we can talk about that in a bit. And like having that, of course, also be, the whole time I was homeless, I was like basically making my living as an astrologer. I was also in grad school, but of course that wasn't really paying me. I was like paying to do that.
Yeah.
And well, for the first couple of years, it did pay me, but then it didn't, and I became an astrologer. But I was, out and about. I was online talking to my clients. Like, even though I would see people in person, I was like traveling across the country and the continent doing readings. Like I would end up, I would sort of like, enough people would ask me for a reading, say in like Montreal, that eventually there would be this like critical mass where I was like, okay, I can afford to like get there. And then I would go there and do a bunch of in-person readings. And then the same thing would happen. And I was like, okay, I can like get a flight to the West Coast with like with these readings that people are booking with me out there. And it's like, that is such a, having these like survival needs being so visible and being like essential to my personality and in many ways like my brand, although I wasn't like consciously doing a lot of that at the time. And then so to sort of have, and for that to be something that people then kind of like associate with me, right? And it's just like, I was just like so much of
surviving
my career, right? I was like, I'm just like doing the thing to like make it work, right? And then it turns out that that's also like what makes me a good astrologer and what makes me an interesting writer. And it's like, these are the reasons people gravitate to like me and my art. And it's like, that's literally my Mars. Like,
absolutely.
Like, yeah.
That is a very Mars in the 9th house, being a Sag rising, and like your survival mechanism and what you did was literally traveling and doing astrology.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
That's So for anybody that's not like super familiar, the 9th house is very literally like long distance travel and higher philosophies, like traveling and thinking. That's like condensed, boiled down 9th house.
Yeah, and it's like literally my personality.
But
and it's real. I mean, that's the thing too, because it's so tied into my sun. It's not like, so in terms of like the show, right? It's like, it ends up being a show, but it's, I think about like comedy. I'm not a comic, but like I make people laugh a lot. And it's like I'm not trying.
Mm,
It's just like that's just what happens when I'm like fully in presence and like holding my experience and able to like connect with people. And it's like just
mm,
coming from where that is. And a lot of that is my Saturn square too, right? Is
mm,
like the medicine that comes from that is this like it's like relatability, which is funny because then of course I'm ruled by a planet in Aquarius and it's
and
like
what's that?
yes, just this alienation factor that is not really the topic of discussion for today, but is relevant in terms of like my Saturn. So I'm of the
Mm,
Saturn and Scorpio generation. And so my Mars rules my Saturn as well as being in an overcoming square. It's one of the closer aspects, like degree-based aspects in my chart also.
mm,
So this is like a pretty pronounced, yeah, it's a pretty pronounced piece of my experience. And it's like my Saturn return was a very Mars time. And it's like Saturn then kind of moving between my return and then through Sag, over my ascendant and then into this trine with my Mars. So coming from the natal square to like this trine was really this period of me being like my Saturn return was, it brought me, I'd already been practicing astrology for years, but it brought me like astrological magic and it brought
mm,
me like daily ancestor work. Basically, that was my Saturn return in the 12th in Scorpio. And moving between that and then this like trine to my Mars was this period of being like, it kind of revolutionized like my writing and
mm,
my art because I was like, oh, actually, I tend to hide behind my openness and vulnerability because it's like, and not just in my art, but also in my personal relationships and also just in people. And so it's like, it evacuated any kind
mm,
of showiness to it or any kind of like attempting to manipulate my audience or like manipulate people in my life. Um, Not that that was always conscious, of course,
mm,
but that it was like um, attempting to manage others' responses to me and my art and my writing. And this actually
mm.
relates to one of the examples I came up with, which is super interesting, and that's for later. But um, yeah, and so this Mars square my Saturn, Mars square my Saturn, Saturn square my Mars is very much about this like refinement of authenticity, I guess.
Mm.
And this like, I mean, Saturn in the 12th, if anybody like it's in its joy, it is very it
Happy there.
I'm still on like in a day chart. I think Saturn in its joy does. I don't think it softens it as like a joy
Uh,
doesn't soften a planet
it
in complicated
strengthens
positions.
it
Yeah, in like a
in
well,
a weird way.
yeah, it doesn't like make it better. I guess
No,
it
not
doesn't.
better.
Yeah, but it does make it like I think I have a stronger relationship with Saturn
Mm,
because it's in my 12th than like other planets that are in the 12th and people's relationship to them, if that makes
mm.
sense.
Oh, for
Um,
certain. Yeah. I
yeah,
know that I personally have a very strong relationship with my Mars because it's rejoicing.
yeah,
And
totally.
it's based on those standards alone, I usually call it the strongest planet in my chart. Because
Yeah, yeah.
there's not much other strength that you can call on in my chart, quite frankly. So you got to take what you can get. And it's Mars.
Relatable.
And Mars was like, I will take everything that I can get. Actually, I have this one shred of crumb. I will actually take an entire loaf now. Thank you.
Yeah, they do that. They do
Yeah,
that for
rejoicing
sure.
planets do that. They get very comfortable there. Um,
Mm,
but yeah, I
yeah.
I have so many thoughts about all of the amazing things that you just said. Specifically, though, the Mars square Saturn and what you were saying about hiding behind vulnerability, because that's a concept with Mars and Leo that I think is so beautiful. That ability to put so much out, especially as a person who has Saturn rejoicing, like in the 12th, there is so many layers that you could potentially show, and then very carefully having to know what you can show to protect yourself the most.
Hmm. Oh yeah. I mean, and this is there is a piece about, and I mean, I'm still aware of this, and there is um it's like you've done the kind of work with like Captoli and the branding work. And I mean, she's basically revolutionized how I show up. And then also Sarah Chappell, who's like a business coach who I've also worked with. And there is this aspect of like the more public of a person you are, the more there is that you have to keep to yourself in order to not lose it. Like not
Literally to
lose
not
it
lose
and
it.
lose yourself, right? And so there is, and that definitely relates to like hard shit I've gone through, very like Saturn Mars square related. It's like, yeah, I mean, I'll talk about, some of the trauma and some of the disability, and I'll be like really open with it. But like there's a there's a lot going on that I never talk about publicly, right? And so it's kind of like you're sort of iceberg, seeing like a tip of the iceberg. And I think that's a very um Mars and Leo expression is like, well, if I have to be honest with you,
This is
I'm
what you're
going
gonna
to be
get.
very precise about what I'm revealing, right? There's like yeah, I think that revealing word and process is like a pretty Mars and Leo expression.
Yeah, going like the big reveal. It makes me think of like the makeover
Right.
shows where they have like the big reveal of the person. They're like, here's the before, here's everything that they went through, their hardships, their process, their thinking. And then they're like, here's the big reveal. Look at the after. And then everyone oohs and ahs. And they're like, oh my God. And they're like, oh my God, you went through so much. You went through so much. And it's like this big thing. And they have to stand there and be like, yes, I did. Yes, I did.
Yeah. Curated struggle.
Literally like a curated struggle of like, this is everything that I went through to get to this beautiful, glorious point that you can now give me applause for.
Yeah. But there's also something to that though, in terms of like, and this might be like ninth house stuff, right? Is there is a valuing of the journey in a way that's not like bypassy, right? It doesn't, like when I'm working with clients or the IC book, the case stories in the IC book, they're explicitly like those case story sessions I did. So just if people aren't familiar, the IC book is based on case stories from my client work. So from my whatever 7 years, I guess now of client work. And if I'm still an astrologer after this Saturn square, we know it's like real. But what we did was people either volunteered or I reached out to them about doing follow-up interviews to our original client session. And so there's some variability in that in terms of what is then actually included in the book, but it's like the follow-up sessions that we had were me basically like sitting them down and being like, we didn't start with the astrology. Like, of course, I'd studied their charts and I had their signature up and I'd done all of the fancy astrology stuff, but I really sat them down and I was like, what do you want to give yourself some credit for? And of course, some people were like, nothing. But I was like, no, you have come this far and you've gotten yourself this far. And of course, with a lot of my clients and my communities, it's like, it's kind of impressive if people make it past 20, right? Especially if people make it past 30. Like that's, with my own specifics, like statistically is like pretty cool. Like I celebrated when I hit 30. I was like, okay, sweet. Like now we're good. Like we got past this point and like we can make it to 90 or whatever. Right. And so I feel that with my clients and with my communities. And it's like, what do you want to give yourself credit for in terms of either your healing or your magical or your ancestral or just like your homecoming journey, basically? And the stories that people came out with, like, of course, they all aligned with their IC signatures because it's like such an icy kind of story, like no matter where your IC falls. And that piece about, I also, understand time to be nonlinear, like in terms of living with trauma and working with astrology. And I have this like really intense relationship with like the living cycles of the planets and being able to kind of take this relational astrology approach into these cycles and into understanding that people's journeys is really like what matters, and it's not like from A to B. It's not from like the IC to MC. It's like we're always going back and forth and around. And so, yeah, the case stories in the IC book, it's like, what happens if we start with people's journeys? Like, what happens if that kind of like process of makeover, but on like a cosmic scale is the why of what we're doing, what we do. And I think that like Mars and Leo in the ninth, this is an expression of that in terms of me being like, yeah, okay, like the hardship is what matters. These pieces of struggle are an intimate part of who you are, but like also all of the agency that you exerted during that time, all of the, like, even if you were without choice, the movement and the magic that you were able to perform while fate was having its way with you, right? Like that is what we're cultivating and what we're attending to, and like really what is the focus of any kind of healing journey. And so that, yeah, I feel like that is it shows really strongly in the case story process and in what ends up being part of the book itself. And like, yeah, this just all relates to the IC. And I think about Mars and Pisces, like night triplicity all the time, and like my own IC and like the bound it's in. And yeah, there's a relationship to it that's kind of like bounds are so like, there's sort of like secret relationships. They're like secret gifts. Yeah. Yeah. So there's like a Mars and Leo thing there too. But like other people's struggles.
Yeah, because your IC's in Mars bounds or Decan bounds.
Yeah, bounds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That tracks. Especially for me too, because ours are so close.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Oh wait, Decan too. Yeah. Bounds and Decan. It's the MC that's also in the bounds of Mars.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Got it. Oh my gosh. So actually, this is so interesting to me because some of the things that you've been talking about, especially Mars and Leo, like in the ninth and being ruled by the sun, which is in Virgo, so close to Regulus that you are so diurnal that it is so interesting that often I feel like people don't expect perhaps diurnal people to be so Mars because it's like the malefic out of sect. But oftentimes I'm realizing that the malefic out of sect is kind of the one that comes forth more loudly at times because it is not necessarily unhappy as a word, but has to do more to be comfortable.
Totally. Yeah, for sure. Well, and also I'm like my sun is in Virgo, and then my Mercury, Mars are both in Leo, and then my Venus is in Cancer. And so it's like all my planets are also morning star planets. And so they're like, the sky was very bright even before the sun came up.
Because of all the starlight.
So they are all morning stars. And like, especially my Venus is like it's not near greatest elongation, but it's closer to that than it is to being combust. And so there's and Mars definitely exists in that space too. It's like the Venus the Mars Sun conjunction, which happens every 2 years, before I was born was in Cancer. And so it actually isn't that far. It was only like a month or two before I was born. And so it's like the sun is moving like very fast past Mars, right? When I was born. And so I'm born very near the beginning of a Mars sun cycle. Yeah. And so I feel like that has something to do with kind of how loud my Mars is in other people's experience of me as well. And I mean, this is the other thing, right? Is like and this is just sun placements as well. There is I mean, there's like a likability and that relatability factor, but anytime like I hit a certain amount of notoriety in any kind of like industry or scene, like I start being polarizing to people. Like
Mm,
they're definitely, and it's happened like multiple times in my life. And I
mm.
feel like it's at the point where like coming back from hiatus, I'm like, I must be prepared for this to happen now. Um,
Oh,
and
wow.
but that is like a Mars out of sect
For sure.
kind of thing. And then also in Leo, right? And
Mm,
having that having that honestly not impact me all that often on a interpersonal level. Like
mm,
of course sometimes the Mars square Saturn can be really hard. But because it's in the ninth and 12th, it's yeah, it's not that immediately relevant to my like interpersonal one-on-one friendships and stuff, although it does come
mm.
up from time to time. But I feel like it is quite um visible.
When you like have
And
to promote yourself.
yeah, and there is
Yeah.
this awareness of it, but also this like solar Martian recognition because it's undeniable, it's also inevitable. And this kind of like
Mm,
acceptance of it to a certain extent. And I think all Leo placements have to go through a process of sort of accepting that.
mm,
It is part of the coming into, I guess, like, I mean, just adulthood, but also coming into relationship with um like society and however that looks for anyone's journey does come with a certain extent of like accepting responsibility for it. And like Ari Felix, one of the dearest to my hearts, they talk about like solar sovereignty, right?
mm.
And this ability, and then in the IC book we talk about this because it's like there is a way that um coming into a responsible relationship with the sun in a way that is grounded and doesn't like deny the nocturnal, right? But that in fact kind of like, mm,
Amplifies it almost.
yeah, absolutely. But without like consuming it. This is like part of
Yes.
what the manifesto I'm writing has stuff about this in, and also like the method chapters, because it's when I first started the IC book, I thought in 2018, I thought it was like about kind of a reevaluation of the nocturnal. Right. And I was like,
Mm,
because I was looking around and I was looking at other people's astrology practices and like what was being written and stuff. And I was like, this is all about the sun, like, which is fine. I love the sun, obviously. But I was
obviously.
like, this is not all there is. And this is very confusing to me because I don't
Mm,
experience this as all there is.
mm,
And to be able to, and then, but going through the case story process and like my own process of that first, because I didn't start the case story process until 2020 because
mm,
um I got invited to speak at the Inner Sense Healing Arts, which is Kelsey Rose Tort and Drew Levanti invited me to do a talk there on my IC work. And that's how the astrology of coming home first happened. And so that was, and then I also launched my Patreon to explicitly support the doing of the research and the case stories, like to allow me to actually have time to be able to devote to research. And so that'll happen in 2020. So there is this couple years between when I first sat down and wrote like 20,000 words of a manuscript in like winter, early 2018 to 2020, where I was doing my own research with clients and my own chart. And um, just like I had sort of become established socially within the like more international astrological industry, and just being like, okay, so who's talking about the IC when there was like very few people, like Melanie Reinhardt.
but yeah, I was about
Melanie
to say,
Reinhardt
I was
is
about to
talking
say
about the IC.
basically one person until that point.
Yeah. So, and now it's like become a lot more common, which I'm so excited about and blessed about. But to be able to like have that first couple years, which I was also writing my master's thesis. So yeah,
Not busy at all.
it was like a road trip poem, like epic. It just also fits with my
Yeah, that
chart so
tracks.
much.
That
Oh my
tracks
God.
entirely. Like,
Um,
wow.
living different worlds. And to be able to be like, oh, this is not about the revaluation of the night. And actually it's a symptom of like my own whiteness and like colonizer settler bullshit that I think the night has to be saved in the first place. And I
Hollering.
was like, oh, okay, cool. Okay. So that's also like not my lane as well, you know? And I was like, okay, cool.
Screaming.
So what the hell is the book about then? And like, what are we doing here if we're like focusing on the IC, which is like the darkest point in the chart? It's the point in the chart where like you actually can't reach it.
See,
Like
yeah, I was
there
about to say
is,
that.
it is, yeah. So, and it does have this quality of being, um, it's not just not like dark, it's like night, like Nyx, like primordial, like what came before
Yes,
the light, right? Like what came before the
absolutely.
sun. And so it's like that's sort of this place of the IC. And I was like,
It's
what the
very
hell?
fertile.
Oh yeah,
It's
totally.
so fertile. It's so like I think of it and I think of it as just like this very like moist garden that's just like ready to bloom.
Mhm.
Because even if you were born during the day, you know, the
Yeah,
IC is quite literally the most nocturnal point in your chart. Like
yeah,
even more
exactly.
than the moon hypothetically, because the moon could
Hmm.
be like invisible next to the sun. You can't even see it when you were born hypothetically. And so it's like that IC is that darkest, deepest, most like
Hmm.
fecund point in the chart.
Yeah, absolutely. Ugh, I love it. It's like, yeah. Ugh. And
We can
so,
tell
but this,
that I also have a water Pisces. Oh, like a water Pisces I see because that's what like the way it visualizes to me, which makes
oh
perfect
yeah.
sense that it's this like
Yeah, very
juicy,
similar.
fertile place.
Oh my God, you're gonna love one of the stories, GK. It's a story about, okay, I don't even want to talk about it because it's like people can't actually buy the book yet
Rip.
because the first edition is just through the Kickstarter. So like whenever I talk about it, I don't want to like promote it too much because otherwise people will be waiting for a second edition. Like
Okay,
we've
Austin
been waiting
Coppock.
for, I know.
Okay, Austin Coppock.
Bless him. And I'm
We love him.
excited for
We all
whenever it
love
happens.
we all love
Whenever it
him.
happens.
We all love him. We all just like really want the second edition of 36 Faces.
We
We all
actually in this household have a first edition.
you're blessed. You're lucky.
Yeah. I was like one of my favorite tweets was, is it love or do they have a first edition of Austin Comics 36 Faces?
I don't know a
Because it
love
was
like that,
Rain's.
but I don't know
Because
a
it's
love like
Rain's
that, but
copy.
I love that for you. I love that you know a love like that.
Thank you. Um yeah, so the in doing that work and kind of like uncovering all that, it was like, okay, so actually what we're doing here is we are recuperating the solar in some way by attending to the IC. And it's like, because the day will just like, it's already
Consume.
consumed itself and it'll just consume the night in order to try and like deal with its own like guilt and violence and like
One of
its
my
own
favorite
poverty.
real life examples of this is how literally when you look at a map of the world at night, you see light all over it because of how many large cities and how much light pollution there is. And the literal visual of like a NASA image of light consuming the darkness is so apt for the way that society is running and operating right now and what society clearly values and what it has thus forced people to value to survive in these conditions. I would not be so bold to say that I think that I can save the night. But as an extremely nocturnal person, it is something that I'm like, oh man, maybe the whole world is running on diurnal values that don't fucking work for some people and really work for anybody when you really get down to the nitty gritty of it. Because if you focus on one, you're missing the other and everybody needs balance.
Yeah. And there's like what's working for the earth? It's like, ugh. Yeah, I'm starting to consider myself a bit of like a night sky activist, which I mean,
Mm.
I have like in my hometown, I have this memory of being a teenager and they put up like some new bar in town, which is very small. So this was a huge deal. Put up like a spotlight like through the sky to move around the sky. And like me and my like teenage partner like wrote letters to the editor and to the city, and we had like a whole campaign. And so they actually had to stop using it unless it was like weekends while it was open. And so they had to like turn it off at 2 a.m. So anyway, it was like, so I was like, this is happening for a long time. But yeah, and I was doing some research for the manifesto. I don't know why I was like, obviously I should get off the phone and go write it. But when I was doing that research, I was like, I was looking into like the actual scientific research of night sky brightness, which is like there is the issue of obviously of just light pollution, which is what we're talking about in terms of like our subjective orientation of how dark the night sky is wherever we are. But that's still like, if you go to one of the, like if you go just a bit north of where I grew up, you'll still be able to see the northern lights, you'll still be able to see the Milky Way, it'll still be there, right? But of course, with like the increasing presence of satellites, right, shiny satellites, and with just like the space garbage that's increasingly up there, the night sky brightness is actually literally just increasing no matter where you are on Earth. And so like for me, I'm like, oh fuck, like that's what's happening. It's like, so night sky gazing like will only be visible when you're able to actually leave the atmosphere. If enough satellites are up there, enough garbage is up there towards like night sky. And of course, like the actual, you know, the major constellations, the planets, like those kinds of things will be visible for a long time. It would take a lot for those to be invisible. But that like that backdrop, right? That fixed star backdrop, that like that Milky Way, those minor constellations, the like nebula. I mean, there's nebula that are so important for cultures all around the world, indigenous cultures, that just won't be visible. It's like, what the hell? It's like, I mean, it is just like a new colonialism, but there's
I was about to say that's like the new wave. That's like new wave capitalism taking over, like exerting their force over not just the earth that we're living on, but the sky and the atmosphere, and continuing to expand their reach outside of Earth into space and extend their will of power. That deeply upsets me.
But now I'm haunted about this like night sky gazing only for those who are, and thinking about like consumer rockets, you know, and like consumer moon flights. And it's like, yeah, I mean, you'll have to get there in order to be able to see some of these pieces of our sky that used to just be visible. Everywhere. Cultures have developed for thousands of years based on being able to see all this. And it's like, what does that do? Like, I don't want to know. Like, I don't want to know. There's like, that's for the speculative fiction writers, you know, but it's like, now we're living it.
Yeah, definitely now we're living it. Especially, as like things like that literally occlude the sky, more big cities, more lights pop up that you just can't see it from our angle without any of the space garbage. Like all of those essentially barriers to entry to be an embodied human engaging with the sky without a telescope or software or whatever it is, just like a normal ass human walking outside, being able to look up and know where they are in the world. And that, I can't really express how much that bothers me, especially because for me, being such a nocturnal person has come from an understanding of what the sky looked like at the moment that I was born. Because by all means, a person could look at my chart and be like, wow, the sun is the most angular planet in your chart. You are so solar. And I put on a really good show, y'all. Put on a really good show. But Venus was an evening star. So Venus was retrograde, had already risen, or had not set yet, excuse me. And the moon had already risen and was near full. And so I have come to such an embodied understanding of what the sky looked like and felt like. And that's one of the reasons that I live in Florida, for those who don't know, and there's basically no mountains. I'm flat, I'm at sea level. And one of the things that I love is that gives me a very embodied relationship with watching the planets rise and set and being able to visibly see them very close to that actual moment, especially if it's like setting and I'm looking like over the ocean or watching something set so literally, and then being able to see that as well on the eastern horizon if you just go across, like just across the bay, and you can see the planets rising over the bay, and it's so literal and visceral in my body that the thought of any of that, and obviously planets, they're so large and big, even though they seem small to our eye, they're freaking huge. But they're so massive that they won't get occluded. But all of those fixed stars and all of those things that are so deeply woven into the sky map for so many civilizations and generations of people. Yeah. That just, not surprising that this Mars episode has gone into our deep rage about the sky.
Well, yeah, I mean, ninth house too. Like, it's like, okay, so here's a case study in like what a Mars in Leo in the ninth house like devotes their life to.
Yeah, absolutely. And also the thing that you feel in yourself, maybe you're not capable of doing it and you're within your reach, but something that you feel deserves to be protected.
Yeah, for
and
sure.
Yeah, like just it deserves being protected, it deserves being defended and being safeguarded against proliferation.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a piece to, is this like a satirizing many lives thing, but I have a master's degree in something that's more related to what I do as an adult, but my undergrad degree was in English. I did a double major in English, a bunch of things, but I ended up with a major in English literature and one in environment and resource studies and science. So it's like I studied international climate policy and international conservation policy. And so this like idea of positioning astrologers as defenders of the night sky is a very like it's like taking conservation ethic towards, and like ecology ethic, and that's the like relational astrology, relational astromagic. It's like this is where I'm standing. It's like this is where I ended up, and it brings all of this together, and it is this like, with technology we have this amazing capacity, more so than ever, for people to be connected to the planets and to be connected to the astronomical orientation, and of course makes it accessible to people who have low vision or to people who are blind, right? There's a way that this increases accessibility to the night sky on so many levels. But of course, at the same time, for many of us, it needs to be balanced in some way with actual embodied presence. And of course, this is what so many of us are on about in terms of like actual relationship. And like that includes for many people a visual sky and like observational astrology relationship, and like learning about heliacal rises, right? Learning about the cycles in terms of like being able to identify a square in the sky versus a trine, and like understanding how that feels, like moon phases and all that. It's like there's a way that this becomes part of us, and like the mystery, it's like, so the difference between, I guess not where I am now, but like when I lived in Montreal, which I lived there for on and off for like a decade, on Chojiaga, and there you could see the planets still, like most of them. I don't think you could see Saturn. You could rarely see Mercury, but like Venus, Jupiter, Mars, they were invisible in the sky all the time, no matter where you were in like the brightest center of the city. But also they were really easily visible, and like really, which was beautiful, but also like compared to where I grew up, which is like Milky Way, like Northern Lights land, it's like the planets are actually kind of hard to spot sometimes. And so you had to learn the stars, you had to learn the constellations, you had to be able to recognize the ecliptic in the night sky to be able to be like, oh yeah, that is Venus, like that's not serious, and like to be able to kind of orient yourself. And like that, when we lose night sky brightness, we lose that capacity for developing that sort of discernment, right? And like that is being able to come into relationship with the night sky and with the night from a very diurnal culture. Like that discernment is a huge part of, because the sun can just erase difference, right? And this is how it gets really mutated when it comes to white supremacy culture, and the way that there's an absorption and a disarming of difference, and like how violent that can be. And like that does mirror the way the sun can just like overexposure, right? And like
Mm.
that process of like blinding light, or like light that is totally overwhelming.
Yeah, I'm thinking of like an overexposed photo that has like the exposure
Exactly.
all the way up and like everything's whited out. And so it's like very harsh to the eye.
Yeah.
It takes a very long time to discern what's in there because it's
Hmm.
so bright and so harsh. And
Yeah.
it comes off very disconcerting because you're trying to essentially find your bearings and find like where, especially when things are so overexposed and so bright, there's not a lot of differentiating shapes or textures. So you're like, what
Totally.
size is this? What's the importance of this? What's the
Yeah.
scale? And all of those questions on a large scale, writ large, everything.
Yeah. Well, and with the light, it's like the definition that does exist is very sharp and harsh, right? Versus when you're in the dark and there's not, like, you can't see a lot on a similar level, like it's the definition gets very soft, right? Like things
Mhm.
blend into each other, like things blend into the background rather than it just being like this is here and this is not here. Like
Mm.
it's like, oh, it's all kind of the same, maybe sort of the made up of the same stuff. And so there is this way that like losing the discernment of being able to, identify a star amongst
Mm.
this like vast backdrop of stars sort of does mirror ideologically this like wanting everything to be the same, and the kind of like flattening of whiteness that happens, and just the like, and how enforced it is, right? And so it's like that, and then this being like light pollution primarily being spread by like oil and gas development
The
still.
big corporations.
Well, but then yeah, and then also quote unquote sprawl,
Mm.
right? With like our big box
The,
stores that are still being built, and
mhm.
and not even at this point now, I guess it's like Amazon fulfillment centers,
Mm.
right? Like when one of those shows up on the map, it's like so much light 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
Um, and of course, they're usually in places that wouldn't necessarily have that otherwise. And
Have that light. Yeah.
so, yeah, this is all, all
It
bringing everything
becomes
together. But
it,
astrologers as kind of like defenders of this feels like a very potent, and it is a way. So this coming into my work as an astrologer is a very
mm,
like Mars and Leo. It has that like uh it's like I don't know, like 6 of Wands, 7 of Wands, this like
mm,
um there's like a warrior capacity to it, but it's not the same
absolutely.
as like Mars and Aries, right?
No, not the
It's
same.
like
It less
it's like
very different.
righteous and divine,
Yes.
like it was especially in the ninth house for me, like
I was thinking of the word righteous actually, because a lot of the times when
yeah.
I think of like, especially like a Mars and Aries energy, that's very forward. And it's not that Mars and Leo is not forward, it's that it goes about it in a very different way. There's not as much like outward feistiness. It's more of that like internal self-righteousness of like
Better or worse.
knowing what you know is right and doing that, as
Mhm.
opposed to trying to perhaps potentially exert that at so vibrantly outwards the way that it often seems to, with Mars and Aries, which I
Mhm.
also love that placement, by the way. This is no
Yeah,
shade, this is just comparison, y'all.
totally. Yeah, yeah,
Actually, speaking
absolutely.
of, this would be a perfect time to talk about the Aries and Scorpio houses, like
Mhm.
specifically in your chart being the Mars ruled places in your chart. I love that Pallas and I are both Mars ruled Saturn people. I have a special place in my heart for the Saturn and Scorpio generation as a whole.
As we have a soft place for the Saturn and Aries generation.
Yeah, like there's just so deep of a kinship when your malefic is ruled by another malefic. Like it is deep, y'all. And anybody who has a malefic ruled by a malefic understands, specifically when they're not in domicile, like when they're ruled by the other. It is
Totally.
so visceral of an experience that dealing with things that are displeasurable or uncomfortable just becomes part of who the fuck you are as a person. And it becomes a part of your resilience in a way that is so profound.
Yeah. Ooh, my 5th and 12ths.
Yeah, very much.
I mean, there is a piece about, it's like, which one first? God. I feel like Saturn in my 12th is like a weird gift, but of course being overcome by Mars is that's the trickiest piece about it, I think, from the square. And just like, it's like, yeah, okay, Saturn's rejoicing, but also, and like Mars is like cadent and like not in dignity, and you know, like but has like always wins.
Always
Like
wins.
Mars always wins in my chart. And like having, so I don't know, my 12th house experiences, like it's like, okay, so a significant amount of solitude has been forced on me over the course of my life from like when I was a child. But I'm also really good at it now. Like I'm, and I wouldn't be able to have my creative practice. I wouldn't be able to have my professional practice or have my relationships if I wasn't really skilled at being alone. But it's like, when it comes down to it, I'm like a very sociable person. Like I love being with humans. Like they're my favorites. Like any true Aquarius placement talking about humans in the
I hate them, but I love them.
It's like, so, I'd rather be with people. I'd rather be with family. I would rather like be with my friends, but my life circumstances for one reason or another are such that that's kind of rare.
And that so you also require a lot of solitude to recharge, I would imagine.
Yeah,
that there are some people who are like, oh my God, I recharge with other people. And then they're like, I actually recharge when I'm by myself and I can just like meditate and process.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think other people think that about me more than I do. Like I caught up with an ex from like college, like a couple years ago, and he laughed, and I forget how it came up, but he was like, you need more alone time than anyone I've ever met. I was like, no, I don't. What? But it's like, I've had it for my entire life, that there's very few situations in which like that becomes necessary. Right. And then it's often such a relief to be among humans. And like, yeah, that it's, and I also, it's like a very Aquarius thing too, in terms of like when I was like homeless, I would like spend, I mean, I always had shelter. I was always able to crash somewhere, or like afford a place to stay for a bit. But I would, you don't want to stay at the place you're crashing at all day. So you end up like either outside, or of course, because I'm from Canada, it's like winter. So I would always spend time, like I'd spend my days at like public libraries. I'd spend my days at malls, like mall food courts, like it's, and I love that. So these places that like other people maybe go, I mean, not libraries necessarily, but these places that people go to socialize, these like common squares, for me became the places that I would be able to like go and be alone and be safe, right? You like go to the museums on like the afternoon that it's free, right? And it would be so busy, but it would be like, oh, I'm in the art museum, like not even looking at the art. I'm like sitting in a corner reading a book or like writing an essay, but it's like, there would just be so many people around. And so it's that like, so that's Saturn in the 12th, Mars in the 9th, Mercury, right? Which is like this humanity, humaneness of that. And just like, yeah, being sort of being forced to be around people, but like being alone while you're doing it, right? And so there's this, it kind of works both ways in that. And then in terms of like,
I do just want to say real quick though, that what you specifically said about how you find that solitude and alone time in places that are so full of people. And then how you also said like almost the inverse of that, you're like getting to be around people that I actually know and love and trust is such a relief and such a release after that seemingly like almost like it makes me feel like that like packed in like a sardines container vibe of like it's just you, but you're surrounded by all these things that are happening, all these conversations and things that are happening, but you are yourself this like pillar of like strength that you're just doing your own thing by yourself in the center of all of that, which is just such a beautiful visual of your Saturn.
Well, and this is also, I mean, it relates to the Mars too. And this is one of those things. It's like weird things people compliment me about, right?
Yeah.
Which I'm not telling people to not compliment me about weird things. Like I do have Leo placements.
We love that. We love
I've
that.
learned to accept compliments. I realized early in life I had to. But it's always, like I've spent a lot of my life traveling alone, right? Like the number of times I've like I never realized that it was kind of weird to travel alone, right? Like until I like started doing it more publicly. I had to be on Instagram and stuff for work, and people were like, how do you do it? I went to, the one, or I guess like the one time I've been to continental Europe was when I was homeless and managed to get over there and, live out of a backpack instead of in Canada. And it was like, I traveled alone for 3 months, like through multiple different countries. And, I met up with a couple people in different places, but wherever I was, I just like, I either met people or I didn't. And, it was, but it just never, it was only during that trip that I realized that it was like, weird potentially to travel alone, especially as like someone who gets coded as a woman, right? And that being like, I don't know, it never occurred to me, and that feels like a weird kind of Aquarius experience. And so, but yeah, this like Mars in the 9th square Saturn in the 12th is like I literally have traveled alone like all my life. Like that just feels so, and it's almost it's ninth housey in terms of it always being spiritual or something like.
Of course, it's never just a trip. It's a fucking pilgrimage every time.
Yeah. Sad rising life hashtag.
Yeah, truly. Like it was not a vacation. It was a journey. Excuse you. Like, get in line.
I spent most of my life there, most of my time there, like either studying, like I went there to study astrology at like the Faculty of Astrological with Melanie Reinhardt, no less, and also with Mark Jones in Wales. And then the rest of the time there, it was like I was just, I was like staying in the cheapest places I could. I was buying like the bread and cheese that was on sale at the grocery store, and like that's it.
Making it happen.
It's like I spent like more in 1 week in Wales, like doing this like master class than I did for like the month, like the next month.
That tracks.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, also, I forgot to like explicitly say this. So earlier kind of mentioned how, I guess just based on like essential dignity, the sun exalts in Aries. So the sun has this essential dignity in Mars place, although Mars doesn't have that for the sun. Mars being in the sun's place does seem to have some of that almost accidental dignity. Also, specifically with Mars in Leo, making a square to Scorpio, one of the places that they rule, and then making a trine to Aries, the other place that they rule. And so based on this affinity, like alone, Mars has so much power here that it doesn't have in other places, that it doesn't have a strict traditional essential dignity. That accidental dignity through with the sun and through that aspecting relationship with the places of domicile gives Mars so much extra zest here that like even if a person with Mars in Leo doesn't have anything in Scorpio or Aries, they are supported by those houses in their chart regardless, which is honestly pretty fucking sick, y'all. Like pretty fucking sick. Can't relate to that life, but that's pretty sick for y'all, and I love that.
Yeah. And I mean, this is another thing about that, like my, one of those like weird things people notice about me that I'm like not aware of. like about how, so fifth house, I mean, I associate a lot of things in my life with that. Like I'm a very fifth housey person, even though I
Mm,
don't have any, my like, my prenatal Venus retrograde was
mm,
in Aries. And so
mm,
by Gutman's work, I have like an Aries star point or whatever.
mhm,
So that's part of what I give my like Aries being really potent in my chart, but it is
mhm,
also that relationship to the Mars. And having that, yeah, guarding my creative time and my
mm,
artistic practice and like being kind of um like dogged about it, like having, and this is part of the Saturn, right? Because of course then Saturn's in aversion
mhm.
to Aries, so it's like they have this relationship, but not like
But they
Saturn
can't
can't
see
actually
each other.
my fifth house is sort of like free from Saturn, and it's the place where Saturn falls anyway, and so it's like, yeah, I get like the benefits of the Saturn in terms of my
Mm,
like kind of dogged tenacity and like consistent like daily creative discipline. um yeah, and so I get that without feeling like too oppressed by the
I was about
Saturn.
to say, yeah, without Saturn squeezing you too hard. Yeah. It
Yeah, I mean, I
almost,
do definitely like it ends up pretty embodied, and that's like
mm,
something we'll get into too, but there is my fifth house is like a um yeah, it's a pretty not safe. Well, yeah, I mean, it's a
mm,
pretty safe place for me in lots of ways, other than like,
it's protected.
yeah, yeah.
Even though
And
Saturn can't see it, Saturn then being overcome by Mars and then Mars ruling both of those places, it feels very protected.
yeah,
And even though that's a weird thing people have like noticed about you, it doesn't surprise me because it
mhm,
is so, even without conscious or like intentionally, it is something that is so obvious about you and about yourself and your work. Um,
totally. Yeah,
yeah.
there's another thing that, um, I mean, I'm married now, but like, I, yeah.
I'm married now, bitches. You hear that? I'm off the fucking market. We've been knowing that, but the way you just she's like, I'm married now.
But I have like a
We love Rain.
very
We love you,
Mars.
Rain.
Oh yeah, Rain. Oh my God, love Rain. But like my history, like my romantic history is like Diana Rose Harper, also one of the nearest and dearest to my hearts, jokes that like my life is just like basically a series of like indie film vignettes. Because it's like I mean, even the stories of like how I met Rain, but so much of it comes with like really kind of stupid risk taking, like a lot. Like
Oh
the number
wow.
of times I've like traveled to meet someone I've never met before and ended up like falling in love is it's a
Wow.
number of times in my life,
Yeah.
like a number of times. And so it's just it's very Mars and
I
Leo
was
and
about
the
to say
ninth
that's
ruling
so
the
ruling.
fifth.
Because
It's
of
very,
course, when you feel the urge, like that impulse, you can't not do it. You
oh
can't
yeah,
ignore the urge. That I feel is a big Mars
patronizingly.
lesson. Right. And I feel like that's a very big Mars lesson that I love that people eventually all have to come to terms with in their own life is not being able to resist the urge, whatever that urge is, whatever the Mars urge that is calling them to do the thing is doing. You
Mhm.
inevitably you can't say no. Saying no will only give you a fight for longer and longer and longer. And then you're just going to get more fucking tired because Mars is going to be like, how long are you going to fucking fight? And then you just have to say,
So
okay,
true.
let's go. Let's do the
So
thing.
true. Mm.
Yeah. And I
Yeah,
love
and
that.
my Mars has a, which one is it? Um, I had a fixed star reading with Amaya Rourke years ago, like when we
Oh,
first met. Um, and she talked about my Mars and its parents as like there's just a lot of it has to do with instinct and like following my instinct. And also, I mean, I have other parents in my chart that just make me like very lucky. So it's like a good thing that the risk, it doesn't always turn out best. Sometimes it turns out absolutely terribly. But like most of the time, turns out a lot better than one would think on average. Um, sad life. But
I was about to say sad rising life. It'll all work out.
but yeah, but that like Mars and Leo instinct and following that and trusting that, which is such a solar thing, right? Like trusting in spirit, and like my lot of spirit being up there too, and Leo also relates to this, right? And just like being able to actually, and also I think Amaya's not going to do fixed star readings for long. And
No,
so
that's
if
correct.
anybody,
Yeah.
I don't know when she's closing that, but if anyone wants a fixed star reading with
I don't know.
Amaya,
She
go
might
get
have
it.
closed them already.
Really? Oh
She
no.
might have closed
Okay.
them already. Yeah, I'm on her
Well,
mailing
folks
list because I
folks
got
should
a
check anyway.
yeah, everybody. If you're interested in getting a fixed starting from Amaya, run, do not walk. Like actually sprint. like actually sprint. Yeah, because I had one with her, I think back in like 2019 or 2020. And it fucked me in the good way.
So good. Yeah. So there's this way I like that, following that, those urges or that instinct, and this like, oh yeah. So the asteroid Eros is
I believe that is actually the only thing that I have in Leo, funny enough, is
really
the asteroid
so
Eros.
mine's in Leo. It's partile
Really?
my Mars.
Really?
Yeah.
I have to check what degree mine is at now, because I don't remember that off the top.
Yeah. There's definitely
Oh,
something being hot in public.
oh wow, my Eros is actually very close to your Mars.
Oh my God, I love it.
Wait, they're actually very close. that tracks. Yeah, but that's the only thing that I have in Leo. And funny enough, I'm comfortable sharing this because I don't care. But I have had many a partner with many a Leo placements. Many a Leo placements, and also Aries as well, just having fifth house Aries placements, because I also relate to having a very wild romantic history. Very much relate to that. Bless us, Mars Saturn things, quite frankly.
Yeah,
but I do, especially the Mars Saturn relationship, like the malefic relationship, and then also the Mars Sun relationship, in that seemingly like bridging the sect in a way that Mars doesn't quite do the same in other I guess diurnal signs, because they are not diurnal signs that are the diurnal sign ruled by the sun. That Mars in Leo has this at the same time diurnal and nocturnal quality that really brings out a bridging of like how you have to think about things based on how they feel in your body.
Totally. Yeah. That instinct piece just feels so potent with Mars and Leo, for sure. And yeah, learning to trust that, I think, is like such a huge Leo question, period. But Mars and Leo makes it very like anxious and like immediate, and yeah, that kind of refusal to be refused, like refusal of being refused, feels very like Mars and Leo too. There's like the indignation is like a very, I mean, my Saturn tempers a lot of this like more excessive Mars and Leo. Even though Mars wins eventually, there is kind of that Saturn sort of is like dragging that Mars down a little bit, for better and worse. Like that square, malefic square, is a
malefic squares are hard.
Whole thing. It's a whole thing.
I don't know if you want to talk about your moon at all.
Oh yeah.
But that's a little that's a beautiful little softening bit that I think is sort of.
I think it would be, but, and I mean, this leads into the embodiment piece. It's like, because that's, I think for being cadent, I definitely feel my Mars more physically and acutely because it is trine my moon in the first house. Yeah, it's definitely like inflammation, pain stuff. Like my moon is pretty happy, like it's fine, but it's like, it's in Sag, it's out of bounds, it's a first quarter, although it's first quarter by sign, it's more trine by degree.
It's literally vibing.
Yeah, it's very alive. It's very alive. But with that Mars trine, it's like, yeah, that energy gets pretty directly I don't know what the right word is. It's like very focused. Gets very focused into my physical body, and just like how I like I deal with a like significant level of chronic pain. And it's like that eases with like water stuff and whatever. But yeah, my first house is definitely that trine from Mars. Gives a pain factor that otherwise I don't think would be that present. My moon's separating from Mars and it's still there,
Yeah.
And but there is too about like my moon has a lot of, it already has a lot of energy, and then it has even more energy with the Mars. The Saturn sort of dragging down that Mars, I think, works in its favor because then it's in aversion to my moon, which is supportive. But having that, I think my puppy's snoring. She's been so good.
Yeah,
So good.
This one just came up. Yeah, if you're watching the video version, you're seeing my baby because she officially decided it had been too long since she had been touched, which usually does happen when I record. Anybody who's seen the pod knows that I have Mercury Mars conjunct in the 6th, and that this is a thing with my pets.
Cuties.
But yeah.
Yeah, but the Saturn Mars square, definitely, and anyone with that aspect will know like it's tension, and it's like the worst kind of tension. Like, yeah. So, and that does end up being like embodied on a significant level. And like if I'm not moving, like moving is literally the most important thing for that moon and for managing that Mars trine. And it's like if I'm not moving, like there is more pain, right? Like movement is the only thing that lessens the pain. And there is so I'm always, and this is another one of the Mars in Leo things, I think, is that, and you understand this, it's like I'm always training for something. Like I don't end up performing ever anymore, even though I did that a lot as a kid. But I'm like always doing something. So right now I like with Saturn's ingress into Pisces, I started like lap swimming. And so it's like, my third time going to the pool, the like director of the complex, and this is like so fucking, this was on the ingress of Saturn in Pisces. And it's like the director of the thing asked me, or said that I would be welcome to join their like master swimmer club, which I guess is just like a national thing that people do. But I was like master swimmer, and I was like Saturn in Pisces.
I was about to say.
But that's kind of the thing. There's this like physicality. There's this like undeniable physicality to the placement. And it's like, you wouldn't necessarily think that this, Virgo sun would be in like cadent ruler Jupiter and stuff. Like it's not, it doesn't really give like athlete or like performer necessarily, but with that Mars Mercury, it's like if I'm not training my body for something, I'm losing it a little bit. Like there's just so much extra energy. I had like a I had like a day before my Saturn return started, but it really intensified during my Saturn return. I had like a daily Ashtanga yoga practice for 7 years. And it's like mostly it was by myself. Like I would drop into a studio every once in a while if I needed like some kind of correction, that because I couldn't get something. But for the most part, it was just me alone on my mat, wherever I was, like moving around. And that was like, that was a huge piece of it. And then I like for a couple years was like did pole training when I was in Montreal for a while, and that was amazing. And then what was I doing? I guess when I was out in BC, I was still doing I was doing different kinds of yoga, but then I was also I was like trail running and like teaching myself how to like trail run. And it's like
that is such a Sag thing though. Truly it is. Like trail running is such a Sag thing, I've realized. And I love that. I am not a trail runner. I do other things that are related, but that's not my Sag thing. But hip thrusts are my Sag thing. Honestly. But that's so wild. There's been so many things. I didn't actually realize that you had done like so many different movement practices. Because didn't you dance as well?
Yeah, well, I was a
Yeah.
ballet kid
Yeah.
too. So I was put in ballet when I was 4. And then did it until I was like 15 about.
Oh, this is an appropriate time to plug. I need to get better at
Oh,
doing
yeah.
this. If you're listening to this, I have already released the ballet and astrology episode with Joe O'Neill. So go listen to that if you haven't, because it's amazing and I love her so much. And we dive so deep on ballet. It was wild. And it was so
I'm
much
so
fun.
excited to listen to that.
Yeah, but that is already going to be released by the time this one is. So go and listen to that if you haven't. But yeah, so many different movement things. Wow, I love that. Your Mars is really like, I gotta get it out. Gotta get it out in any way possible. In any way possible.
Whatever is accessible. Like when I was back, a very long story, but I ended up back in my hometown in like 2017 to take care of my parents' dying dog. It was like a whole Saturn in the 12th.
I was about to say,
situation there.
yep.
But it was like I couldn't. There was no trails to run on in like my hometown, and so but there was a flamenco class being taught by this like really beautiful, amazing older woman at like the dance studio that I used to do ballet at when I was a kid. Yeah, and so they had moved, so it wasn't the same actual physical studio, but it was like the same dance studio.
People.
And yeah, and so it was like, so I just kind of do whatever is like accessible to me. And so yeah, it was, in Vancouver Island, it was trail running. In my hometown for 3 months, it was flamenco. It's like here, I'm like doing lap swimming at the pool across the road. It's kind of like and that's the Jupiter in the third for sure stuff.
Yeah.
But
I was kind of thinking that like the Mars Jupiter like opposition, like you're able to find the activity that you need in any community that you find yourself in. Like,
yeah,
no
like the only reason
environment.
I started pole dancing because it was like they had classes. A lot of the dance studios in Montreal are francophone only, and so it was like one that had bilingual classes, and it was I could get there within 15 minutes on the metro from my apartment. And then I trained there for like quite a while. And so, it was when I was still moving around. So suddenly my ability to live in different places of the city got very small because I knew I had to be within a certain
close to that
amount of time from the studio. But yeah, it's very like, that's how I found it, because it was like in proximity to where I was. And then it was awesome, and I got obsessed because that's what happens with
that is a very literal thing of that Jupiter Mars, is like being able to find whatever it is and it being close and having that, like literally having an abundant resource of it. Yeah, which is amazing, because then you have any outlet that you need for your Mars to take in whatever place you find yourself in along all of your many travels in different places you've lived. So that's crazy.
Yeah, that functions in a few like fifth house ways, I would say.
Oh, for sure.
Historically.
Especially having, Mars in the ninth, ruling and aspecting the fifth, that would suggest that whatever physical activity you are doing has to also be a creative practice in itself.
Yeah, for sure.
Because not all movement is created equally. I struggle even saying that, because I love all movement quite literally. I haven't found a single one that I dislike, which is honestly kind of fucking sick. I've looked for things I don't like. I really can't find any. I can kind of like it. It's weird.
I went through a climbing phase too, actually. One time I was living in downtown Toronto, and like the only thing within, and I was living with a partner who had been climbing before. And so we ended up going to a gym for like a year.
I remember we talked about this at Norwalk briefly. Yes. That's amazing. You're like, I've done everything actually. But that is really like a ninth, fifth, like Mars ruling and aspecting thing, is like, there are movements that are not inherently creative practices, even if you're a runner, hypothetically, there can be like a very creative form of running, like trail running and things like that. But there are a lot of people that are just like, I run in the city because that's how I get my exercise. And that is what it is. It's a means to an end. And I have full respect for that. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just different. It is just a different approach to it.
On a treadmill.
Right.
Unless it's on like the uphill setting. And I can
Unless it's
Then
a
I can
challenge,
manage for a bit,
unless it's
yeah.
really hard, I can
Unless
pretend like
it's
I'm on a
really
mountain.
hard. It either has to be creative or it has to be really hard.
Oh, wow.
So that's the Mars square Saturn again.
I was about to say it has to be amazingly joyful or it has to suck so bad that I can't think about anything else and it consumes me.
Yeah, exactly. And then I'm in like so much pain the next day, but like the good pain.
The good pain. Yeah. That is one thing I will say about Mars writ large, that I will probably say a disgusting amount of times, which is you have to find a healthy physical outlet where, especially that sort of feeling, like a good soreness, doing something that can make you feel tired, make you feel like you worked hard, but you enjoyed what you did so much and you enjoyed knowing that you grow while you do it, that the soreness, that the aftermath is literally like this sick, twisted fucking pleasure that you're like, oh my God, it hurts so good. Like, I think every person deserves to feel that Mars glory. Like, it's so real.
Yeah, right now I just had a in the house we're living in right now, we decided to stay another year. And so the property manager built me a garden. So I have a 4x8 raised garden now that just got put in last week. And so like they gave me a bunch of soil, which just from like the land, which is great, just like the mulchy soil. And then so I just had to put like topsoil and add topsoil and compost to it. And so it was like, and I gardened with my mother all the time when I was a kid. And I've like grown stuff myself, but I haven't had like an actual fucking garden as an adult. And so it's like a big fucking deal. And like ancestrally too. It's just like such a, if there was, if I have like inherited professions, right? It's basically like storyteller, well, baker too, but we're not doing that. I'm not that kind of Marsy, whatever.
I am. We all know I am.
And teacher and like gardener, farmer, right? That's like my people have always been growing their own food. That's just like my mother too. Like that's an unbroken thing for however long ago. And so to be able to do that is like just it's ancestrally so calming and meaningful. And so to have this garden now, and so I was like carrying, you have to carry these like giant bags of compost and dirt, and I was just like, so the other afternoon I got to spend like a couple hours literally carrying around giant bags of dirt, and I was just like, oh, this is like one of those things my body is like created for. Like it was one of those things, it was just like, it was so easy and I knew exactly what to do. And I like had the shovel, and had my fucking trowel and the little rake thing. And I was like mixing the soil and I was like, I just know how to do this, and like the next day I wasn't that sore because I wasn't carrying that much, but I was like just sore enough that I was like, fuck, if I was doing this on like a larger scale, I'd have that feeling, I'd have that feeling that was like, oh, this is like right. And that like, that like good, that like achy pain where, that, where it just feels right. It's like, and so there's a certain amount of that I definitely have to have when I'm training too. And like swimming is definitely giving some of that, but when it comes to the chlorine and stuff, I don't know how long it'll last, because I'm part of the only reason I moved away from Montreal, but another reason why I stopped doing so much pole is that I was like getting to the point where I had to moisturize less. And
that part.
Like I can't do this.
That part.
So
actually, this is
might get to me.
The long-term effects of like the chemicals for sure. Actually, what you said about gardening reminded me, I just saw, it was actually just a couple days ago, there was a Mars lecture. I don't want to mispronounce her name. I believe it's Sabrina Moncini. She's Italian. She did a Mars lecture through astromagia.
Okay. Oh, nice.
And it was on Mars, and it was brought up in the chat, like pruning and agriculture as like Mars remediation, like Mars work. and I like messaged him and I was like, oh my God, for me, that's huge. Because I have a lot of plants. Like I live in Florida. It's a very tropical place. I have also just planted a lot in my yard that requires pruning. And it's a very, very healing Mars experience to be like, I am chopping you off because you are dead and you're going to grow more. And I'm going to use like my sharpest, nicest pruners to make a nice clean cut. And then it's so satisfying. And it is such a good form of remediation for people that potentially have a sticky Mars relationship, is like, get a plant that you have to prune. Like healthy pruning is such a good way to like do Mars energy. And you were also talking about, gardening with your mom. One of the things I like asking is if you have like, any humans or like events with Mars and Leo that you are like inspired by or wish to share any information about. And you and I both have moms that have Mars and Leo that might be worth mentioning.
Yeah, it's like a fierce protector streak.
Fierce protector. And then also for me specifically, like fierce protection of authenticity. I remember as a child, although my mom and I had a very interesting relationship, my mom and I got very close whenever I got a little bit older. I was much closer with my dad when I was younger, which makes sense because my dad has like the ooey gooey Mars and Cancer, like made me feel safe as a kid because my Mars is in Taurus, you know? So like my dad, of course, the nice Mars sextile, like, oh, I feel so safe around you. But then as I became a teenager and like came into my own and was like, puberty, hormones, society, high school, college, like needing my mom and needing her Mars and Leo like square to my Mars fire to be like, no, you go be yourself. You do what you are going to do. Be unapologetic about it, in a way that I felt like my mom cultivated that within me in a way that I didn't realize that I needed until I got to adulthood. And I was like, oh my God, she is the audacity of that woman that she inspired within me, like even to this day, because my mom and I are still very close. We work together. We are best friends that are moms that are coworkers. It's a very, very difficult, multi-layered relationship. But at the same time, it is such a passionate and vibrant and loud relationship that I see her Mars come through in ways that inspired me and then gave me a literal permission slip to be more confident in who I am as a person.
I love that.
No.
Yeah. That like protective of creative life definitely in part comes from my mom. I mean, both my parents really like cultivated that in me. My dad more on the sort of like specific skills. I was like, but then my mom in terms of like time and space for sure. She reads like a book a day. It's like this woman, I don't know. She's the most well-read person I've ever met in my life. She's read like every book in our hometown library, you know, like it's, but has very specific taste also. So like, you know, not every book, but most books, even stuff that like I would never think she would read.
That's so cool.
And that's like, you know, there's always like a certain number of pages a day or a certain number of hours a day that like you don't fuck with her when she's like reading that book. Like, which was sort of weird as a kid every once in a while, but I loved reading too, and she taught me to love reading, so it was like we would just read together all the time.
Wow.
But also like tons of art, tons of crafts. Like my home was a workshop, for better or worse, and
for better
it still
or worse.
is in many ways. And all the like magical workshops, it's like all altars and art
that does get passed down now. That definitely does get passed down, totally. Especially with Mars and Leo, that like that need for creative space. I feel like it's very real, because I remember that being something that my mom had, like, because my mom and dad each had like their own office growing up, and it was kind of like a you don't fuck with each other's space thing. Like both of them were like, I don't fuck with your office, you don't fuck with my office. And then to me, it's like, don't fuck with either of our office. And I know that my mom, like specifically hers was like, obviously she would get stuff done, but it was this creative space where she would make stuff. And that my mom has always been like that, making stuff. And passing that on to me and then incorporating me in that. And it's like, all right, come in here and help me make this thing. Like, what would you put in this? How would you do it? You know, from a very young age, being involved in that creative process and knowing that you have to protect that.
Yeah, totally. Totally. Yeah, I
Yeah.
was looking through, I hadn't done this before, but I briefly looked through AstroSeek and AstroDataBank
Oh yeah.
before we were talking, and like there's like so many people I actually love who have Mars and Leo, and it was like I think
Oh,
I just like I don't
yeah.
work with celebrity charts, like I work
Yeah.
with my clients' charts, and that's
Mm,
it. So some of this is very funny, but it was like some of them are very good and like specific to me too. But it's like
yeah.
one of the first ones that popped out to me was Cher, who has Mars and Leo.
Yeah,
And I was
she's on
just
my
like,
list. I
it was
love
like my
her.
mom's, Moonstruck is like my mom's favorite movie. And it was like, she's just always wearing like fur and gold. And I'm just like,
Mm.
that's so fucking
Yeah,
perfect.
Cher was a big one I wanted to mention because my
Oh my
mom also
God.
has always loved Cher. I knew like when you said your mom had Mars and Leo, I wanted to bring it up regardless because my mom does, but my mom has literally loved Cher forever.
Oh my
Um
God.
like it's a newer movie, but the movie Burlesque, like the
Oh
role that
yeah,
Cher has, like
totally.
the like total boss bitch role, like runs everything. I remember seeing that movie with my mom and my mom being like, this is Cher's role.
Oh
This
my
is
God, it's
it.
so true.
And I was like, stop. Like it was so funny. And especially like looking at the astro of it all, I'm like, of course you love her in that role because she is being Mars and Leo. She is protecting the
Totally.
creation of this art space. Like it was so perfect.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah, that was one. And then there was a couple like writers. So Leonard Cohen has Mars and Leo, and I knew that one. And it's
Mm.
like one of my like I was a performance poet for a while, and so like I have a bunch of shit memorized, but it was years ago, so most of it's just kind of foggy, but like the one or like one piece that stuck from that time, which was like a very Leo time for me, is um no one calls the crickets vain in their time, in their time. No one will call you idle for dying with the sun. I'm like, that's so fucking Mars
Damn,
and Leo.
yeah. Damn, yeah. Wow, for dying with the sun.
No one will
Fuck.
call you idle for dying with the sun. I'm obsessed. So,
Oh my
so there's
God.
that. So there's that
That
one.
is
That's a
so
good Mars
so
and Leo.
I was gonna say if anyone was looking for like the Mars and Leo quote, that's the one.
Isn't it beautiful? Oh my God.
Wow.
And then William Blake. Well, I've looked at William
Mm.
Blake's chart before because our synastry is like pretty good.
Mm.
But I hadn't remembered it until I saw this, and I was just like he literally like one of his most famous poems. Like he's always on about like the divine fire. That's like literally all he
Mm.
writes about. But like he literally has like the tiger poem, which is like one of his
Oh
most
yeah.
well-known popular poems, which is also about the divine fire.
I was
But
about
he's
to
always
say
talking
that.
about like Eros and the spark and the muses and like,
Wow.
madness, and that is just like all so relatable. So he's been like
Mm-hmm.
very important in my life. And the same with Cohen. They've both been very important. And then the last one I found was um Roland Barthes, who's like
Oh.
he wrote so this is actually related to the stuff about the book too, is like and like authenticity and like all of this and this like square from my Saturn, because he
Mm.
wrote the essay The Death of the Author, and it's like
Mm.
incredibly important. So my master's degree is in a program, it's technically an English program,
Mm.
like media studies, cultural theory, called Public Texts, and it's like literally
Oh.
about the creation and reception of texts, and that's why it relates to astrology, and because it's like I studied how to look at old manuscripts and what like ideas about reception and who makes books and how, right? And so Bart
Oh.
wrote this essay and was part of this like post-structuralist movement that was like, well, movement, I mean, that's very vague, but
Mm-hmm.
um that my education was really based on, in terms of like it disconnected the author's work from their life, basically like the
Mm.
author's work from their biography. And so it was like an author can have an intended meaning, but it doesn't actually exist. Like that's not actually like
Mm.
the reality of a text. Like the author, upon um writing something, becomes kind of one with like performative act of the writing. And like, that's kind of all there is. And then there's like how the text is received by an audience. And like, that's when that kind of like meaning gets created.
That's when the meaning
so it's like,
making is.
yeah. And so this like death of the author is like, we can't control or manipulate how people receive our art, right? How people receive our writing. Like, that's just not our shit. And so that Saturn return I went through was part of that, right? It's like, we can't control people's perceptions of us or receptions of us, and our work. There's just like, and so this coming to of like being a sort of polarizing figure, and like understanding that, and coming from a place where like, I'm writing this book. There's an ant on my microphone. That's so funny. What a jerk. We're putting you outside after, buddy. You do not belong up here. You had to get all the way up here. Anyway, but yeah, it's not a, I'm sort of writing this book in this kind of context where I understand like where people have already bought it, right? It's like the reception of the book exists on kind of like a different level than it might, if someone like writes a book or not writes a book, because the book was already written, but it just, had to be created in a different way and finalized. Like, it expanded. The book's expanded after it got funded.
Of course.
And so to have like, Mars and Leo. And so he has Mars and Leo, and he's a Sag rising. And so
of course
has this like Mars and ninth, and it's like death of the author. I'm like, are you fucking kidding me?
Of course.
So that was the other one that really stuck out to me.
There's one in particular that I want to bring up that's actually super relevant to transition to it, because you're speaking about like reception in writing and in text, and it makes me think of how the different arts are received and how the meaning is made from them. Besides Cher, my other major Mars and Leo example is Christopher Nolan, who is a director. I personally know a lot about Christopher Nolan because my partner loves their movies. My partner
I had a partner who loved his movies at one point. Yeah.
My partner has a couple Leo placements too, so it totally tracks. But Christopher Nolan has Mars and Leo like conjunct the sun, like super conjunct, like a degree conjunct. And I think that this is a timed chart, I believe. Maybe I'm not going to quote houses because I'm not sure if this time is accurate or not. But regardless, they have Mars in Leo conjunct the sun. And for people who don't know, I'll just read a couple of things that Christopher Nolan has worked on, which is Batman Begins, The Dark Knight, Inception, Interstellar, Tenet, and another movie that's about to be released, I think like this summer, is Oppenheimer, that people are looking forward to. And like major movies that have done massive like visualization, massive, I think transformative power in how people are entertained and are viewed. I know personally, one of the reasons my partner loves their movies so much is the way that they are able to use visuals and music and all of those components of theatrics to really take you to a place and really make you feel something based on everything that's going on. And that ability to kind of how we were talking about at the beginning, the ability to be vulnerable and show a lot, and that being the show. And that also like kind of not just protecting, but kind of not glossing over either, but having this very interwoven relationship with what's shown and not shown, and how in a visual art that really makes your mind so creative and makes you go to a different place, because what you're seeing versus what you're not seeing on screen, and the way that that's making you feel is then doing this very complex thing with yourself emotionally, that I think he has such an art for, that is really so obvious in his like Mars and Leo conjunct the sun.
Yeah, totally. Well, and just like the scale too, right? It's like that's one thing about Nolan, and like the scale of just like how many people watch his movies is just
oh my
crazy.
God. Like, he's stupid famous. And I think that that's something that a lot of people, he is definitely a director that people know, but a lot of the times those roles like director or producer aren't as I guess, widely talked about. You know, it's often the celebrities and the stars and the actors themselves who get a lot of that critical acclaim and stuff, and they get a lot of the hype. But him being a director, filmmaker, somebody who has really curated these visions, has gotten the rightful credit that he deserves for being a curator in those ways of experiences, and really like the Mars of it, being willing to take a person there and go for the drama and really give you that experience, which is a very beautiful way of exhibiting showmanship that I really love. Do you have anything you wish to share? You kind of have, but is there anything else that you like wish to share about your experience with Mars and your body? Any like words of wisdom you have for other people with Mars and Leo? Words of wisdom you have for people who potentially love someone with Mars and Leo? Any of those things?
This ant is crawling all over my computer. It's so funny.
You're like, speaking of my body is aware of this ant
too. It's so funny. It's like on
daddy.
my screen now. I'm like, you're scouting. There's nothing here for you, friend. The offerings are in the other house.
Ah.
I think. Anyway, whatever. Like, hey Mercury.
Hey Mercury.
Anything else? I mean, I think and this of course also depends on the condition and place of the sun, but I think like Mars and Leo, there is a way that the like anxiety or aggression can be turned towards oneself, in a really, can be like really harsh way. And so like some of the protective stuff helps with that like managing, is like embodying the authenticity and not just like minimizing oneself, which I mean, when it's Mars and, you know, especially in a day chart, I think it can be like people wanting you to be smaller, and that being a really tricky thing to navigate, especially if you're public, in any way. And that like that kind of comes to the forefront, right? And like that that battle within yourself and kind of with your son. And so that becomes because it's also just like painful. It's not just that like that battle is uncomfortable or disappointing or anxiety inducing. It's also like it's like literal pain.
Literal Mars pain.
So yeah, so just like I guess the patience component is always relevant with Mars. Yeah, that's probably kind of the main thing.
Love that. Well, to wrap up, let's promo, baby. What are you working on right now? You kind of said at the beginning, but go ahead and remind the people what you're working on right now, what you offer, where people can find out more about you, Pallas, all of the glorious things about you, because obviously now that you've heard all about Pallas's amazing Mars and Leo, you're like, I want to work with Pallas in astrology, obviously, duh. So let the people know.
So I am, even though the book isn't in my hands yet. I got my green card, so I'm back to work, which is great. Yeah. And so I wasn't planning on doing public sessions anytime soon, but Vesper, my sweet pup, that we just adopted a couple months ago, got diagnosed as positive for heartworm disease again. She had it last year when she was just like a puppy, a rescue puppy, stray. And so now she has to go through it again because of either a lingering infection or a reinfection while she was still in the South before she got up here and then found us. So I'm doing a round of Venus retrograde in Leo readings, special sessions. And by the time this is released, they might be sold out, but maybe not, because they're short. So today's Wednesday, and then Thursday they're going to be released, and then they start Sunday until Wednesday. But there might still be some left. And
so if you're listening to this on Saturday when it releases, again, run, do not walk, sprint to book with Pallas if you would like a spot.
So they will probably be on on socials at that point, if there's any left. So I am 9 of Wands, 9.of.wands on Instagram. So that's me there, and that's the place. 9ofwands.com is my website. And there you can find the mailing list, which is who actually my patrons get whenever I have sessions available, my patrons get them first, and then my mailing list gets them, and they rarely get to social media. So there's that. And then what else am I doing? Those sessions are tied into like more work I'm doing on the Venus cycle, and specifically this Venus retrograde in Leo. The first Venus cycle I ever fully tracked with devotional work specifically was in 2015 with the Venus retrograde in Leo. It really sort of like started then, and then like became really serious in the next, like by the next Kazemi that happened, the direct one. And so that, yeah, so I'm sort of like taking this time to kind of celebrate that. And so I'll be making another workbook like I did for the Venus retrograde in Capricorn.
Which, yes.
Yeah. So patrons are getting like little preview glimpses of that work now over the next couple months. And then the workbook will come out at some point. So Instagram's the best way to find out that. My profile is still active on Twitter at 9 of Wands, just one word. And right now it's up as an archive, whether or not I return. I was thinking of maybe returning for Norwalk, because I'm not going to Norwalk.
Yeah, we're sad about that. Everyone is sad about that.
Everyone, if people want to see me at Norwalk, they can write in their survey afterwards that you want to see me at Norwalk.
To be fair, I put that in my survey last year after you spoke and fucking killed it. And
thank you.
That's on Norwalk's fault for not listening to me. Not listening to me alone.
It's incredibly rare that they ask someone new to speak 2 years in a row. Just to be clear, it's like from an organizational standpoint, it's very normal.
Which I understand. I'm not like a butthurt with Norwalk. I'm just letting the world know that we all love Pallas. And would like them back. Because you really did amazing your first talk. It was so good.
Oh, thank you.
Which, do you have that
It was a bit polarizing.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, I know.
LOL.
I know.
Shock.
Good for my Mars and Leo.
Well, that's on point. Do you have that available on your website? You should plug that if you do.
Well, I don't right now, but one of the things that with Vesper's illness has been postponed a bit is I'm starting a membership for consulting astrologers called Spiral. And so there's a wait list for that. And so you can get on the wait list by going to 9ofwands.com/mailing list. And there's a little option to get on the Spiral wait list. So that will happen. And that's in part based around what I share in the Finding the Thread talk, because it is specifically a talk for people working in consultation, or even just doing readings for other people, basically. But it's thinking about, it's like offering different ways to think about using planetary cycles in the consultation. And so I was like, it's pretty heady. And unless you already have a grounding in astrology, and it's like a weird talk. So
okay,
I was like, I don't want to
good talk, Pallas.
Thank you. I don't want to, but I didn't want to just put it out in the world.
For anybody.
Without some sort of context for it, for people to actually put the work into practice in their practices.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's going to be
no
like
context.
Sort of like a, more of kind of like a coaching container style membership that will be doing that, and will be working with, like a living cycles approach more generally, and kind of like going through it ourselves. And so there'll be, the astronomy, the astrology, all this stuff, but kind of worked through live as things are changing. So, and we're in a whole new with Pluto in Aquarius and Saturn in Pisces. So that'll be coming. I would anticipate, with Vesper's treatment being so intensive and going to be taking up most of the summer, I think Spiral will probably be August, September. Maybe I think it's probably something we start when we head into the winter. And so we're like spending the winter doing that together. So that talk will be part of that whole thing. And Idola Stellarum, we're having
Oh yeah, plug the magic, baby.
We're having our second astromagical talismanic jewelry collection release, and that'll be solstice, so in June. And it's really beautiful. We're calling it the Summit collection, and it's not, we're not saying what's included in it yet. Get on the mailing list. So it's Idola Stellarum, IDOLA stellarum.com. And there you can get on the mailing list. We're also on Instagram, and we do like fortnightly lives, AMAs on Friday evenings, which are really, really cute. So it's me and Rain, and just like, it's basically sitting in on our dinner table conversations. It's like magic and astrology.
So cute. And they're so cute, y'all.
Pretty cute.
They're so cute. Pallas Rain are so cute.
Also satirizing. So
I know, it's amazing. It's amazing. They're wonderful people.
And yeah, I think that's it. Talisman. And the first collection sold out like really fast. It didn't even get to social media.
If you were lucky enough to get a talisman from the Sanctuary collection, you're blessed. And definitely get on their mailing list if you think you might want something from Summit. Even though they haven't said what that's in it yet, you probably want something.
Yeah, and we'll also, right. The other thing about Idola Stellarum too is that early access, we don't have a way for people to get early access right now, but we are coming up with one. So yeah, it was like almost like 75% of the collection was like the early access list got it in the last time. And we don't yet have an early access list for this one, but of course our mailing list is also bigger. So I don't know. I don't necessarily like scarcity, like talent, but it is realistic.
It is
because
realistic
of Vesper's illness.
And it is also realistic with talismans in general. Like you can't, unless you are working like a massive operation, just logistically, you cannot make a lot of them.
Yeah. And we're really strict with our standards in terms
and your
of
windows of time and stuff.
Yeah, really strict with them. And so we don't fuck around with like being outside of like the specific elections that we decide on. Like in terms of, we tend to be quite conservative in our magic, and very like exacting about the ingredients we use and the elections we use. And there's always, because time is what it is, and there's no perfect election, in every talisman we release comes with a thorough discussion of the election.
Very thorough.
Yeah.
Very thorough.
Bless Ray. Including a discussion of the weakness of what we perceive as the weaknesses of the election, right? And we're very clear about our materials and the process. And I don't know, we're trying to build a place where people can be can enter into astrological magic with less just like worries about perfectionism and blowing themselves up, and building some like trust in themselves, and also trust in their magicians. And
I was gonna say trust in who they trust.
Yeah, exactly. And just like kind of modeling what we think is like ideal for our own practice and for like Idola Stellarum as an entity. And it means we also don't make that many like elections, right? And so because of Vesper's illness, we're making, and just like the intensity of our time and attention for that it is a smaller collection. It's smaller than the last one, so we will have bigger collections in the future when there's just like more space for us to play around. There are many talismans in our house that are in safe storage. They are resting.
They're resting.
Waiting to be. We also we take a 6 months or more beta testing period where either Rain or I or both bind to a talisman to test it out and get to know the spirits before we ever offer them to the public. So that's also something. So in in our collections, we'll be having things from mostly 2022. We have some like late 2021, I think still, but you're always going to be kind of like looking back to see like what that time was like and like who was around. Yeah, so there'll be all of our, so we're releasing quarterly collections. So this is our second one, and I'm very excited about it.
So exciting.
Yeah,
I love seeing it develop and seeing what y'all are doing. It's so beautiful, and I love it. I love it so much.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very, talismans are very special. And because this is, so the way to get early access will also be, it'll be wrapped up in ways to also engage with Idola on like different levels. And so you can watch the mailing list for more, for more information about that.
For more juicy goodness, obviously.
Yeah, juicy goodness.
Oh,
Yeah.
amazing.
Thanks, Mackenzie.
Oh, thank you so much for being here, Pallas. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for talking with me about your Mars placement, about Mars and Leo, about a placement that both of us love so much. And I'm so grateful that you have been a part of my Mars series.
Yeah, thanks for doing it.
Thank you. I love Mars so much. This is such a beautiful, beautiful opportunity and experience to be able to hold this space. So thank you, Pallas, for being here. Thank you, listeners, whether you are listening to the audio or if you are watching the video on whatever platform you find it on. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening or watching. And thank you for being funky. I will see you the next time our fates weave together.